Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're looking east, specifically up at Russia's space agency.
That's right, Roscosmos. You really can't understand the global space picture without grappling with them.
Absolutely. Forget just SpaceX for a moment. We're talking about the heirs to, well, an incredible legacy, Sputnik, Gagarin.
Exactly. The Soviet space program. That history is immense. It casts a long shadow, and it's key to understanding the agency Roscosmos is today, warts and all.
Right. So our mission here is to trace that story from, its birth after the Soviet Union collapsed, through all the ups and downs, the reorganizations.
And right up to the really intense pressures they're facing now, both financially and geopolitically, especially since 2022. It's quite a ride.
It is. We're looking at an agency that's had to constantly reinvent itself. Okay, let's unpack this. Starting with how the agency itself was, well, basically a new idea back in '92, February 25th, 1992. It wasn't just a rebranding of something Soviet.
That's such a critical point. The Soviets didn't have a central space agency like NASA or ES.
Really? So who was in charge?
Power was, let's say, distributed. It lay mostly with the big design bureaus. Think Energia, Khrushchev, these powerful engineering groups. They were the ones making the big calls on rockets, missions, budgets.
Not some central government office.
Largely, no.
Yeah.
So creating the Russian Space Agency, which later became Roscosmos, meant pulling power away from those established, powerful engineering groups.
Right off the bat, that sounds like a recipe for some serious internal tension.
Oh, absolutely. And then you throw in the context, the 1990s, total financial chaos after the Soviet collapse.
Yeah.
State funding just dried up.
So they've got this new structure, internal resistance, and no money. How did they even keep the lights on?
Well, they had to get creative, resourceful, maybe. They started leaning really heavily into commercial work.
Like launching satellites for other people?
Exactly. Commercial satellite launches became huge for them. And, famously, space tourism, charging millions to fly wealthy individuals to the Mir space station.
Wow. So commercial necessity, not grand strategy, kept things afloat.
Pretty much. It even influenced big decisions. There's evidence the private shareholders at Energia pushed to keep Mir operational way past its sell-by date, just because it was bringing in cash.
So that scramble for dollars in the 90s, selling rides, launching things, and it kind of accidentally prepared them for the next big thing, didn't it?
In a way, yes. It made them a player you could do business with internationally, which leads us straight to the International Space Station, the ISS.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because that moment, October 31st, 2000, when a Soyuz launched Expedition 1 to the ISS, that really locked in Russia's place in the post-Soviet space order.
It absolutely did. That launch kicked off, the continuous human presence we've had on the station ever since. And Roscosmos wasn't just a minor partner. They were fundamental. Core modules like Zarya, Zvezda, they were essential.
And that ISS partnership got stability, right? And presumably more reliable funding compared to the wild 90s.
Definitely more stability. And, yes, funding did improve. By the mid-2000s, the Duma approved a pretty significant 10-year budget. 305 billion rubles for 2006 to 2015.
Okay, so the money's flowing better, but where was it going? Was it balanced?
Well, that was the critique. Even with more cash, observers noted that a huge chunk, maybe up to 50%, seemed to be pouring into the crewed programs, especially Soyuz in progress supporting the ISS.
Which makes political sense, maybe, keeping that lifeline going, especially when the shuttle retired, but
the argument was it starved other areas. Modernization, new rocket tech, robotic science missions.
Yeah.
They weren't getting the investments they needed.
And did we start to see the impact of that lack of investment elsewhere?
We certainly saw reliability issues crop up. Things culminated in the early 2010s with a really damaging string of failures.
Ah, the Proton M failures, right. Those were bad.
Very bad. 2013, 2014, 2015. High-profile, expensive satellites lost. It was a major blow to their reputation and, frankly, triggered a pretty severe government reaction.
Yeah, that led to the big shakeup, didn't it? The government stepped in hard.
Extremely hard. They announced a plan in 2013 to basically consolidate and renationalize the entire space sector, force it all together under one roof. This led to the current state corporation structure that fully took effect in 2016.
And the justification was pretty blunt, wasn't it? I remember a quote from Dmitry Rogozin, who was deputy PM then.
Oh, yeah, that was striking. He pointed out the Russian space sector employed around 250,000 people, compared to maybe 70,000 in the U.S. for arguably similar output.
Leading him to calculate their productivity was?
What was it?
8 times lower than the U.S. A really stark assessment.
Wow, that's damning. Was he saying the engineers were bad? or something else?
It wasn't really about the engineering talent, I think. It was about the structure, the bureaucracy, that legacy of competing design bureaus, duplication, inefficiency, stuff inherited from the Soviet era that hadn't been fixed.
So the consolidation was meant to streamline all that, cut the waste before trying to build the fancy new stuff. That seems to be the idea. Fix the machine before you task it with building the next generation of machines.
Makes sense. Okay, speaking of the machines, what are the workhorses actually flying today?
Well, the absolute legend is the R-7 booster, which everyone knows as the Soyuz rocket. It's the most launched rocket in history.
Still going strong. What can it lift?
The standard version gets about 7.5 metric tons to LEO, low Earth orbit.
Right, LEO. Just to remind everyone, that's the sort of orbital neighborhood where the ISS lives, most satellites, the easiest place to reach.
Exactly. And the newer Soyuz 2.1B variant can push that up to about 8.2 tons. For the really heavy stuff, they use the Proton M. That beast can lift over 20 tons to LEO.
Okay, so Soyuz for medium, Proton for heavy. Are these the future, though?
Not entirely. They're the current workhorses, but Proton M is definitely slated for replacement. They're developing the new Angara family of rockets specifically to take over that heavy lift role eventually.
Got it. Reliable, but aging systems being replaced. Now, amidst all this serious rocketry and reorganization, sometimes space throws up some stranger stories. We have to touch on the geckos, right?
Yes. The Futon M4 mission in July 2014. A dedicated biology flight.
And it had geckos on board. Why?
5 of them. 4 females, 1 male. The idea was to study, well, gecko procreation in microgravity. See if they could, reproduce up there.
Okay. Sounds a bit weird, but I guess it's science. What happened?
Well, things went wrong pretty quickly. They lost reliable contact with the satellite. The mission was planned for 2 months, but they had to cut it short to 44 days because of the communication problems.
And when they got it back?
Sadly, all 5 geckos were dead.
Oh, no. What went wrong? Did they run out of food or air?
The initial thought might have been starvation, but the analysis later suggested it was likely a failure in the heating system. They probably froze.
That's awful. But strangely, other things on board survived.
Yeah, that's the bizarre part. Fruit flies, some plants, even mushrooms that were also part of the experiment. They made it back okay. It just highlights how risky even these seemingly routine robotic science missions can be.
Like there are other science programs, the Bionum Life Science ones, or the Electrel WeatherSats, Spectre RG for astronomy. There's always risk.
Always, even when things seem stable.
Okay, let's pivot now, because stability, well, it took a massive hit in 2022. This really changed everything for Roscosmos, didn't it? The whole geopolitical situation.
Fundamentally. And you have to remember, the agency was already feeling some financial strain before that. They reported a loss of 25 billion rubles back in 2020.
So they weren't exactly flush with cash going into it.
No. And then the invasion of Ukraine triggered this cascade of consequences almost overnight. International partnerships just fractured.
Yeah, the reaction was swift. Roscosmos pulled out of launches from Europe's spaceport in Kourou, French Guiana. That was a big deal commercially.
Huge. And they stopped delivering those RD-181 engines to Northrop Grumman in the U.S. Those engines power the Antares rocket, which launched Cygnus cargo ships to the ISS.
And the West hit back just as hard.
Oh, yes. The European Space Agency, ESA, suspended cooperation on the ExoMars rover mission. That was a major joint science project now stalled.
And commercially.
Big hits there, too. OneWeb, the satellite internet company, had been launching on Soyuz rockets. After some earlier friction, they completely shifted their contracts away, mostly to SpaceX and India's ISRO.
The money impact must have been devastating. Do we have numbers?
I do. Roscosmos itself reported losing about 180 billion rubles in export revenues. Things like engine sales, launch services. But the really stunning figure, they reportedly lost 90% of their launch contracts from Europe.
90%. Wow, let's just sit with that for a second.
Yeah.
90%. That's not a downturn.
It's a cliff edge, a commercial amputation, basically.
And you see it in the launch rate, right?
Absolutely. As of late 2024, Russia was on track for its lowest number of orbital launches in a single year since 1961.
1961, the year Gagarin flew.
The very same year.
Yeah.
That's a stark indicator of how much their international launch business collapsed. There was even talk from officials about maybe not reaching profitability again until 2025 or later.
So this chaos obviously puts huge strain on the ISS partnership, too. It's continued, sort of, but the writing's on the wall.
Completely volatile. While astronauts and cosmonauts kept flying together, Roscosmos made it official. They plan to leave the ISS partnership after 2024. That forces them to think about replacements, new directions.
And new partners, presumably? If the West is largely closed off?
Exactly. And the major pivot there is towards China.
Ah, yes.
Yeah.
The International Lunar Research Station.
That's the big one. In 2021, Roscosmos and China's CNSA signed a memorandum to work together on this lunar base concept. It's a very clear strategic shift east, replacing those severed Western ties.
So they're planning for a future largely independent of the West, which is reflected in their big plans for new stations, new rockets, even if the funding looks, well, challenging after losing all that business.
The ambition is definitely there, despite the financial headwinds. Their flagship domestic project is the Russian Orbital Service Station, ROSS. They're talking about starting construction as early as 2025 to replace the ISS for them.
A whole new Russian space station, and you need a new ship to get there, right?
Right. They're developing a new crew castle, the Prospective Piloted Transport System, or PPTS. It's called Oral. The plan is for a crewed test flight around 2028.
Okay, new station, new ship. What about the rockets to launch all this and other things?
The rocket roadmap is ambitious. There's Urdish, which is supposed to be the successor to the current Soyuz 5 variant. Then there's Amur.
Amur. What's special about that one?
Amur is planned as Russia's first reusable rocket, using methane and liquid oxygen methalox. That's a clear nod towards competing with the likes of SpaceX's Starship, planned for maybe 2026. Reusable methalox, that's a major technological step. Huge investment needed there. And then there are the really big ones.
Oh, yeah, the super heavy lifters. They're planning NSA, aiming for over 100 tons to LEO by maybe 2028. And the ultimate goal is Dawn, targeting something like 140 tons to LEO, maybe in the 2032 to 2035 timeframe.
Those are moon rocket class vehicles. Mars rocket class even.
Precisely. Designed for deep space stuff, which ties into their robotic plans, too.
Right. They haven't given up on planets despite the Luna 25 crash last year.
No, the Luna-Glob lunar program with orbiters and landers is still officially on the books. And they still have long-term plans for Venus with the Venera D lander mission notionally targeting 2029. Venus has always been a major focus for Russian planetary science.
So what does this all mean?
Well, it means we're looking at an agency caught in this incredible bind. It has this absolutely unparalleled history, the legacy of the pioneers. But right now, it's facing just massive financial problems and pretty deep geopolitical isolation.
Yet, despite losing, 90% of European launch contracts, they're doubling down on independence, pushing super hard for their own space station, ROS, and developing not one, but like 3 new classes of advanced rockets, including those super heavy ones. It's a collision of crisis and, well, extreme ambition.
And you mentioned the cost of that independence. ROSS alone, the CEO, Yuri Borisov, said could cost 609 billion rubles by 2032. So for you, the listener, here's the thought. Given that huge reported loss of launch income, the overall financial crunch, what's got to give? What other big plans those giant Yenisei rockets, the Venera D mission to Venus, might have to be sacrificed or drastically delayed to actually pay for RSS, their new anchor in orbit? It's a massive gamble, and the trade-offs are happening right now.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to unpack the stories behind the sources, digging into the facts, the surprising details, and, well, the context you really need. Today, we're tackling a name everyone knows, but maybe not in the way they think. Frankenstein.
That's right. It's become totally synonymous with the monster, hasn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The big guy, square head, Nick Bolts, he's the villain for most people.
Mm-hmm.
But if you actually pick up Mary Shelley's novel, the original story, well, it tells you something quite different. Frankenstein isn't the monster.
He's the creator, Victor Frankenstein.
Exactly.
And that's our mission today, really, to kind of push past all the Hollywood layers, the pop culture stuff that's built up over, 2 centuries?
Yeah.
And get back to the source, Mary Shelley's 1818 novel, Frankenstein, or the modern Prometheus. It's a Gothic masterpiece.
So we're looking at how this incredible story even came about, because that's a tale in itself.
Oh, definitely. A very weird summer, actually. And we'll look at the science in the book, or maybe the lack of specific science, and why the fact that the creature doesn't even have a name is maybe the most heartbreaking part of the whole thing.
Right. So the basic setup is this. Young scientist, Victor Frankenstein, brilliant guy, manages to create life, a thinking, feeling being.
An incredible achievement, scientifically speaking, within the story's context.
But his reaction, Pure terror, he just runs away.
Abandons it completely.
And that one act, that moment of, well, catastrophic failure as a creator, kicks off everything. All the tragedy, the revenge.
It all spirals from there.
Okay, let's start with Mary Shelley herself, because her life story feels so connected to the book's themes. She was, what, only 18 when she started writing it?
Yeah, incredibly young. 18 when she began, published anonymously when she was just 20.
And her background wasn't exactly conventional, was it? Daughter of William Godwin, the philosopher.
Right, famous radical thinker. But her mother, Mary Wollstonecraft, the famous feminist writer, died just days after Mary was born.
That's profound. That idea of losing your mother almost at the moment of your birth.
It casts a huge shadow. You can feel that sense of loss of absent parents throughout Frankenstein.
And that sense of gloom seems to fit the story of how the book was actually conceived.
Mm.
You mentioned a weird summer.
Oh, yeah. We're talking about 1816. It's often called the year without a summer.
That sounds ominous. Not just bad weather, then.
No, this was a global event. It was caused by the eruption of Mount Tambora in Indonesia the year before, 1815. Massive eruption.
Okay.
Threw so much ash into the atmosphere, it basically dimmed the sun, caused crop failures, constant rain, cold, a volcanic winter, essentially.
So Mary Shelley, Percy Shelley, her future husband, Lord Byron, his Dr. John Polidori.
Aye, they're all stuck inside.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Cooped up in the Villa Diodati by Lake Geneva. Gloomy, damp, boring.
I can just imagine. What do you even do?
Well, they started reading ghost stories,
Yeah.
German ones, translated, called Phantasmagoriana.
Spooky stuff to pass the time.
And then Lord Byron gets this idea. He says basically, hey, we should all try writing our own ghost story, see who comes up with the best one. The famous ghost story competition.
That's the one. And apparently Mary struggled at first, couldn't think of anything scary enough.
Really? She seems like the obvious winner in hindsight.
Do you think? But then one night the conversation shifted. They started talking about the latest scientific ideas, the nature of life itself, reanimation.
And this thing called galvanism. What was that about back then?
Galvanism. It sounds a bit like magic now, maybe. But in 1816, it was cutting-edge science, named after Luigi Galvani.
Right.
It involved using electricity to stimulate muscles. People were doing these sometimes quite theatrical demonstrations, making dead frogs' legs twitch, even using animal or human corpses.
Whoa. Okay, that's creepy.
It was, and it raised this really profound, kind of terrifying question. Could electricity actually jumpstart life? Could you reanimate dead matter?
So that idea was buzzing around her head.
Exactly. She went to bed with all this talk of reanimation swirling around, and later she described having this waking dream.
A waking dream, like a hallucination.
Sort of. She vividly pictured it. The pale student of unhallowed arts kneeling beside the thing he had put together.
The creature.
Yes. And then she saw it show signs of life, animated by some powerful engine. And crucially, she saw the student's horror at his own creation.
That was the spark, the moment of inspiration.
That was it. The fear wasn't just the monster, it was the creator's reaction to it.
Wow.
And interestingly, that same competition, that same gloomy summer, also produced John Polidori's story, The Vampire.
No way. So two iconic horror figures born from the same contest.
Pretty amazing, isn't it? The vampire, as we kind of know him, the aristocratic, romantic figure, starts there too.
And the name Frankenstein. That wasn't just pulled out of thin air either.
No, there seems to be a connection there too. Mary Shelley had traveled along the Rhine River in Germany.
Okay.
And near there is a place called Frankenstein Castle. Apparently, local legends talked about an alchemist, Johann Conrad Dippel, who lived there about a century before Shelley.
And what was he supposed to have done? Experiments on bodies?
Yeah, the stories involved weird experiments, maybe trying to create artificial life, working with bodies. So the name itself already had this resonance, this hint of forbidden science.
Okay, let's talk about the creature. Because the image most people have, Boris Karloff, the bolts, the flat head that's so ingrained.
It really is.
But you're saying the book is quite different. How did Victor actually create him in the novel if it wasn't lightning and sewing body parts together?
Right, that whole visual, the stormy night, the kite, the stitched-together corpse, that's almost entirely from the 1931 movie by James Whale.
Yeah.
Hugely influential, but not really the book.
So no lightning storm needed.
Not explicitly mentioned like that. Victor describes discovering some fundamental elemental principle of life. It's deliberately kept vague.
So she doesn't give us the how-to manual.
Not at all. He says he spent 2 years on it. 2 years constructing the body.
Constructing it. From what?
This is where it gets maybe even more disturbing than just grave robbing. He says he used materials from the dissecting room in the slaughterhouse.
Like dissecting rooms and slaughterhouses. So not whole bodies, but raw materials, organic components.
Exactly, bits and pieces. He's building this thing from the ground up, essentially, and it's huge, 8 feet tall.
8 feet. Why so big?
The novel suggests it was easier to work on a larger scale, but imagine it, this massive patchwork being made of who knows what exactly.
That's somehow more grotesque than the movie version.
I think so too. It emphasizes the unnaturalness, the sheer ambition and hubris of it. He's not just reanimating a dead person. He's building a new type of person from organic refuse.
And then he uses his secret principle of life to animate it.
Right. Some unspecified process imbues it with vitality. Shelley purposefully kept that fuzzy. The point wasn't the pseudoscience, it was the moral implications, you see.
The crossing of the line.
Precisely. And Victor's immediate horror and failure to take any responsibility for this life he's just created.
Which brings us back to the name thing, or the lack of one.
Yes. He's never given a name by Victor. He's just called horrible things.
Like what?
Wretch, monster, fiend, demon, vile insect. It's constant rejection.
That's awful. To be denied even a basic identity.
It marks him as an outcast from the very start. But here's the incredible thing. Despite this total rejection, the creature is intelligent. Highly intelligent.
How does he learn? Victor certainly doesn't teach him.
No, he learns by hiding, observing a family, the DeLacy's, living in a small cottage. He watches them through a crack in the wall of a hovel he hides in.
He learns language just by listening.
Language, reading, complex ideas about society, family, affection, all by watching this family he can never join.
Wow. And he finds books too, right?
Yes, crucially, he finds a satchel with some books. Plutarch's Lives, Goethe's Sorrows of Young Werther, and most importantly, Milton's Paradise Lost.
Paradise Lost. That feels significant.
Hugely significant. It gives him a framework for understanding his own situation, his creation, his abandonment.
Is that where the famous quote comes from, where he confronts Victor?
It is. It's such a powerful moment. He basically says to Victor, quoting Milton, "I ought to be thy Adam, but I am rather the fallen angel.
Whom thou drivest from joy for no misdeed." He sees himself as Adam, the first creation, but treated like Satan, cast out by his God.
Exactly. He understands his potential for goodness, like Adam, but recognizes he's been made monstrous through rejection, like the fallen angel. It's heartbreaking self-awareness.
But that misery, that awareness, it doesn't lead to peace, does it? It leads to violence.
No, it curdles into rage and a desire for revenge against the creator who wronged him. His isolation is absolute, his suffering is immense, and he lashes out.
Who does he kill first?
Victor's youngest brother, William. A child. It's brutal.
Oh, God.
And then, to make it worse, he frames the innocent family servant Justine for the murder. She's executed.
So he understands injustice and then inflicts it himself.
Yes, the cycle of misery continues. Later, he murders Victor's closest friend, Henry Clerval.
Clerval. Wasn't he the sort of counterpoint to Victor, more connected to humanity?
He was. His death is a huge blow. And the final act of revenge is the most devastating.
On Victor's wedding night.
On the wedding night, yes. He murders Victor's bride, Elizabeth Lavenza.
Just unimaginable cruelty, all stemming back to that initial abandonment.
It's a direct chain of consequences. Victor's failure to nurture, to guide, to even name his creation unleashes all this horror. The creature acts monstrously, but his monstrosity is born from Victor's moral failure.
Okay, this scale of tragedy, the way it connects creator and creation, really pushes beyond just a simple horror story. Let's talk about that subtitle, The Modern Prometheus.
Yes, that subtitle is packed with meaning. It's not just a cool-sounding addition.
So Prometheus, the Greek titan, right? Created humans from clay, stole fire from the gods for them.
That's the one. He defied the gods, brought knowledge, fire representing technology, enlightenment maybe to humanity, and Zeus punished him brutally for it. Chained to a rock, eagle eating his liver daily.
Grim stuff. So Victor is the modern Prometheus,
Right.
using science instead of fire.
Exactly. He's this brilliant figure who reaches for forbidden knowledge, creates life through his own fire, the spark of life, electricity, whatever his secret was, and is ultimately destroyed by his own creation and his transgression.
But there's a twist on how Shelley might have viewed Prometheus, isn't there? He's usually seen as a hero, a champion of humanity.
Right, that's the standard take. But there's evidence to suggest Mary Shelley and Percy Shelley, too, had a more critical view, possibly influenced by some unconventional thinkers of the time.
Like who? And what was their take?
Well, figures like Joseph Ritson and ideas circulating within their radical circle, including Pythagoreanism and, believe it or not, vegetarianism.
Have vegetarianism. How does that connect to Prometheus?
It sounds like a leap, I know. But some interpretations, drawing on Pythagorean ideas about avoiding meat for purity, saw Prometheus's gift of fire differently.
Not just as enlightenment, but
As the thing that enabled cooking meat. And therefore, Prometheus was seen not just as bringing knowledge, but as enabling this perceived vice, this fall from a more natural vegetarian state.
Wow, okay. So Prometheus wasn't necessarily the good guy in their view. He was maybe a devil figure bringing something harmful.
Potentially. Percy Shelley wrote essays on vegetarianism, seeing meat eating as linked to violence and impurity. So, by subtitling her novel The Modern Prometheus, Mary might be suggesting Victor's act isn't just hubris, it's a deeper kind of error, a philosophical wrong turn against the natural order, almost like introducing a primal corruption.
That adds a whole other layer. It's not just science gone wrong. It's a fundamental mistake about life itself.
It connects the scientific ambition to these deeper ethical and even dietary purity debates happening in their circle. It makes the novel incredibly rich.
And speaking of rich connections, going back to Mary Shelley's own life, all that personal loss we talked about, her mother dying, the death of her own first child.
Yes, her first baby, born prematurely, died just about 2 weeks later. This was in 1815, not long before the Frankenstein summer.
That grief must have been immense.
Unimaginable. And scholars widely agree these experiences deeply inform the novel. The themes of creation, loss, abandonment, failed parenthood, the fear of your creation being monstrous or dying, it all feels incredibly personal.
Victor's utter failure as a parent to his creation takes on a whole new weight then.
Absolutely. It resonates with that profound fear of loss and the weight of responsibility that comes with bringing life into the world. And this is why the book works on so many levels. It's gothic horror, yes, but it's also grappling with these huge philosophical and personal themes.
And it's rooted in the science of the day, even if vaguely.
Definitely. It's pulling from real scientific discussions. People were talking about Erasmus Darwin, Luigi Galvani's experiments. That's why many consider it one of the very first science fiction novels.
Because it's not magic.
Yeah.
It's based on potential science.
Right. As one scholar put it, the key is that Victor makes a deliberate decision and turns to modern experiments in the laboratory. It grounds the horror in the possible, which is maybe even more unsettling.
Now, something I found really surprising is that the version of Frankenstein most people read today isn't exactly the original book.
That's a really important point, actually. There are significant differences between the first edition and the one that became standard later.
So the first one came out in 1818, anonymously.
Yes, 1818, anonymously, just 500 copies printed initially. It was dedicated to her father, William Godwin.
But the version in most classrooms or bookstores now is usually the 1831 edition.
That's right, the 1831 popular edition. Mary Shelley revised it herself quite substantially for that publication.
Why did she revise it? Was it just tidying it up?
Well, partly perhaps, but there were bigger reasons. The book had become famous partly through these wild, melodramatic stage adaptations that were happening.
Ah, like plays based on the book.
Exactly. Things like Presumption or The Fate of Frankenstein from 1823. They were hugely popular, but often, simplified the characters, amped up the horror, maybe missed the nuances.
So she wanted to reclaim her story a bit.
Possibly. But also, her own life and perspectives had changed in the years between 1818 and 1831. She'd endured more loss. Percy Shelley had died. Her views might have become maybe a bit more conservative, or at least changed.
So what are the key differences between the 1818 and 1831 versions?
One of the biggest changes is the portrayal of Victor Frankenstein himself.
How so?
In the original 1818 text, you could argue Victor is presented slightly more ambiguously, maybe seen as a flawed idealist, a revolutionary spirit gone wrong. There's a bit more room for sympathy, perhaps.
Okay. And in the 1831 version?
In the 1831 revision, Shelley seems to paint him much more critically. He comes across as more clearly selfish, arrogant, and directly responsible, more culpable for the tragedies. She really emphasizes his guilt and moral failings.
Interesting. So she kind of hardened the judgment against her own character in the later version.
It seems that way. She's making a stronger statement about his accountability. It reflects perhaps her own matured view on the story's themes.
Were there other notable changes?
Yes, a few. The original epigraph from Milton's Paradise Lost was removed in some later printings of the 1831 version, and there were plot tweaks like Elizabeth Lavenza's backstory. In 1818, she's Victor's cousin. In 1831, she becomes an orphan the family adopts.
Why change that?
It possibly avoids the slight hint of incestuous undertones that bothered some readers, making their relationship seem less predetermined, maybe. She also toned down or removed some of the more explicit nods to the radical scientific ideas that were current in 1816, perhaps making it feel less tied to that specific moment.
So the version we usually read is maybe a slightly safer, more morally clear-cut version.
You could say that. It's still a powerful book, of course, but the 1818 text has a raw, perhaps more politically charged feel to it. It's definitely worth seeking out if you're interested.
And how was the book received back then, when it first came out anonymously?
It was definitely mixed. Some critics got it. Sir Walter Scott, for instance, praised its originality and imagination, calling it an extraordinary tale.
But not everyone was impressed.
Oh, definitely not. Some reviews were quite hostile, especially once rumors spread that the author was a woman. One infamous review basically attacked the anonymous female author for forgetting the gentleness of her sex and writing something so shocking.
Wow. Tells you a lot about the times.
Doesn't it? But despite the mixed reviews, the novel was popular. And those stage adaptations, even if they changed things, really cemented its place in the public imagination, even if they helped confuse who Frankenstein actually was.
So wrapping this up, it feels like the main takeaway is that Frankenstein the novel is profoundly misunderstood. It's not really about a monster running amok.
No, not at its core. It's a story about ambition. Yes, about scientific curiosity, but mostly about catastrophic abandonment.
It's about the creator, Victor Frankenstein, and his failure. His name is the one that should carry the weight of the horror, not the creatures.
Exactly. He's the one who sets everything in motion through his fear and rejection. The story is a tragedy born from failed responsibility.
And its legacy is just immense, isn't it?
Oh, undeniable. It's a cornerstone of Gothic literature, romanticism, and, as we said, a foundational text for science fiction. It keeps getting rediscovered and reinterpreted.
People still find it relevant today.
Absolutely. Guillermo del Toro called it the quintessential teenage book, which is fascinating, and it's consistently listed among the most influential novels ever written. Because those themes, creation, responsibility, what it means to be human, alienation, they just don't go away.
So Frankenstein the book, a story of creation gone wrong because the creator failed his creation. The name belongs to the scientist, not the monster.
That's the truth of it. And maybe the final thought to leave people with, something the creature himself forces us to confront.
Go on.
It's that fundamental question he implicitly asks Victor, and that the novel asks us, what is our responsibility for what we create, whether it's literal life or new technologies, AI, genetic engineering, whatever it is?
The question of purpose and ethics.
Right. The creature essentially asks his maker, why am I here? What is my purpose? And Victor has no answer. That void, that lack of guidance and responsibility that must accompany the power to create. That is the chilling, timeless heart of Frankenstein. Welcome to the Deep Dive, the place designed to give you that knowledge shortcut you need. Today, we're taking a look, a really close look, at one of the most common and complex legal things in modern life: divorce. Or what the courts sometimes call the dissolution of marriage.
That's right. And at its core, divorce is really the legal process of ending a marital contract.
Right.
Which then triggers this massive reorganization of duties.
Right.
We're talking things like property distribution, child custody, financial support.
All the big stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But before we really jump in, we should probably clarify one key difference.
Okay.
Divorce ends a marriage that was valid at one point, but an annulment that's different.
Yeah.
It's a legal declaration that the marriage was basically void from the very start, like it never legally happened.
Got it. That distinction is important. And when you look globally,
Right.
wow, there are only two places that essentially forbid divorce. That feels like our first real aha moment here.
It's a really striking global exception, isn't it? We're talking about the Philippines, which doesn't permit divorce for most people, non-Muslim Filipinos, unless there are very specific, quite limited conditions. And then there's the Vatican City, the theocracy.
Just those two. Think about that. Everywhere else has some legal path, even if it's relatively new.
Yeah, exactly. Like Italy only got it in 1970. Chile was much later, 2004. and Malta just in 2011.
So our mission today really is to unpack all this variation, these different rules, look at some maybe surprising clauses behind divorce, and analyze the ripple effects worldwide, all based on the research you've brought us.
Okay, let's start with the legal basics, because there's been a huge shift over time. Historically, you basically had two main approaches: fault-based and no-fault-based.
Fault-based. That sounds like the old school dramatic version, right? Where
Yeah.
you practically had to hire a PI because you needed solid proof the other person did something wrong.
That's pretty much it. You needed specific grounds to even get the divorce approved.
Like what kind of grounds?
Well, historically, common ones were things like desertion or abandonment, usually meaning they'd been gone for a year. Cruelty was another. Habitual drunkenness, drug addiction,
Yeah.
or the really famous one, adultery.
And proving fault, did that just affect whether you got the divorce or did it impact the money side too? Like who got what?
Oh, it definitely impacted the money side.
Okay.
It was both procedural, getting the divorce, and often punitive. Contested fault divorces could turn into these incredibly expensive, drawn-out battles,
Sounds awful.
and it could get worse. Courts sometimes use doctrines like comparative rectitude.
Comparative rectitude, what's that?
It basically means the judge would weigh who was more at fault. So they weren't just saying, okay, you're guilty. They were actually deciding degrees of guilt.
Yeah.
And that could seriously swing things like alimony or how property was split.
Wow. That sounds exhausting and just incredibly hostile, which makes the shift to no-fault divorce seem, well, revolutionary.
It really was. Like taking the boxing clothes off, legally speaking. No fault is the standard in many places now: Australia, Sweden, U.S., states, really since the late 60s, early 70s.
And how does that work?
Under no fault, you basically just have to state that the marriage has suffered an irretrievable breakdown or there are irreconcilable differences. You don't need to point fingers or prove specific bad acts.
Okay, so with no fault, does bad behavior just become irrelevant in court? Or can it still come up somehow?
Ah, that's a really important nuance. While you don't need fault to get the divorce decree itself, the behavior of the parties can still definitely be considered by the court for other things,
Like what?
especially when it comes to figuring out child custody, what's in the child's best interest, or when dividing up property and debts, and also when deciding on spousal support or alimony. So bad behavior might not block the divorce, but it can certainly shape the final outcomes.
Right, so even if the reason for divorce is just it's broken, how someone acted can still matter financially or for the kids. Okay, so if the old fault system was a potential battlefield, what about alternatives? You mentioned most cases don't actually end up in a huge court fight.
Yeah, that's the encouraging part, maybe for people listening who are worried about time and expense. The big courtroom drama is actually pretty rare. In the U.S., something like 95% of divorces are uncontested.
95%.
Yes. It means the couple manages to agree on all the key terms: property, kids, support outside of court, often called mutual consent divorce.
Okay, that's good to know. And then there are more structured ways to avoid court too, like collaborative divorce. I heard that's a bit more than just standard mediation.
It is, yeah. Collaborative divorce is interesting because it involves attorneys who are specifically trained in this non-adversarial process. Often, they bring in neutral financial experts or child specialists, too.
So the goal is different.
The whole framework is designed to empower the couple to make their own decisions based on their needs and interests, rather than handing that power over to a judge. It's meant to be less confrontational.
And then, at the extreme end of efficiency, you found the example of Portugal.
Portugal's quite amazing on this front. They actually allow couples to file an electronic request for a no-fault collaborative divorce. It goes through an administrative body, not even a judge.
Electronic?
Yes. And in certain very specific, straightforward cases like no kids involved, no real estate to divide, no alimony requested, not even living together anymore, the whole thing can sometimes be wrapped up within an hour.
1 hour. That's just mind-bogglingly fast compared to the traditional image.
It really is.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. Who is actually starting these divorce proceedings? The data you found showed a pretty clear gender pattern, didn't it?
A very strong pattern, especially in Western countries. In the U.S., women filed just over 2/3 of all divorce cases. The specific number was 69%.
2/3 initiated by women. Wow.
And it's similar in the U.K. There are about 70% of initial inquiries about divorce come from women.
Interesting. So we've talked about individuals. What about governments? Are they stepping in, trying to influence divorce rates? China's recent move seems like a major example.
Yes, China's cooling off rule is a really significant regulatory intervention. It came to effect in January 2021 with their new civil code. The government's stated goal was promoting social stability and preventing what they called rash divorces.
Okay, a cooling off period. How does it actually work? What do couples have to do?
There are two main parts.
Yes.
First, after you initially apply for divorce, there's a mandatory 30-day period. During that time, either person can simply withdraw the application, no questions asked.
Right.
Second, and this is key, after those 30 days are up, the couple has to both physically show up together to get the actual divorce certificate. If they don't show up within a certain time frame after that 30 days, the original application is just automatically canceled.
They have to physically go back. And what was the result of this rule?
The result was,
Oh,
well, pretty dramatic. China's Ministry of Civil Affairs reported a huge drop in divorce filings, down 72% right after the rule was implemented.
72%. That's massive. It suggests the delay tactic is, in fact, stopping a lot of divorces from being finalized.
And certainly seems to be having that effect, yes.
But this policy hasn't been without significant controversy, right? Especially concerning personal safety.
Exactly. The rule immediately drew criticism from feminists and human rights groups. They argue it undermines individual freedom, and critically, it potentially traps victims of domestic violence.
How so?
Because it forces them to remain legally married to their abuser for that mandatory 30-day period, potentially putting them at greater risk.
And there was that tragic case, Ken Xiaofeng.
Yes, the case of Ken Xiaofeng in 2021 really highlighted these fears. She was murdered by her husband during that cooling-off period after she had applied for divorce. It put the potential dangers of this kind of state-mandated delay into stark relief.
So the state's goal of stability seems to be directly conflicting with individual safety in those cases. What's the counter-argument from critics?
The main critique is that the rule assumes most divorces are just rash decisions. But for someone fleeing abuse, that 30-day window isn't for calm reflection. It's a period of heightened danger. Critics say the policy misunderstands the dynamics of abusive relationships and puts the idea of social stability ahead of individual well-being, even survival.
A really difficult balance. While China is trying to engineer stability, other places have completely different cultural views that shape their divorce rates.
Absolutely. If you look at the global extremes, India is one example. It has one of the lowest divorce rates in the world, something like 1%. And that's largely attributed to the very strong social and sometimes religious stigma against divorce.
Okay, very low rates due to stigma. And then at the complete opposite end.
You have Mauritania, which is fascinating. It's a country with a long history of not just accepting divorce, but apparently celebrating it in some way.
Celebrating it.
Yes. It's thought to have the highest divorce rate globally. It's apparently not uncommon for adults there to marry and divorce multiple times, maybe 5, even 10 times over their lives. The social acceptance seems almost total, completely flipping the script on stigma.
Wow, from 1% stigma in India to potentially 10 divorces being normal in Mauritania. Huge variation. Let's pivot now to the causes. Why do marriages end? When lawyers who handle these cases were asked, what were the main reasons people gave?
Right. A UK survey from 2004 asked matrimonial lawyers exactly that. The top 3 reasons cited were adultery, that was 27% of cases, then family strains, often issues with in-laws in 18%, and domestic violence was third at 17%.
Okay, adultery, family issues, violence. Were there any gender patterns within those reasons?
There were. For the adultery cases, husbands were reportedly involved in about 75% of them. And for the family strain cases, it was the wife's family that was cited as the main source of tension in about 78% of those instances.
Interesting dynamics there. What about money and social factors? Does wealth make divorce more or less likely?
The data suggests couples with higher household incomes are actually less likely to divorce than couples with lower incomes.
Okay, so more financial stability seems correlated with marital stability.
Generally, yes.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a really counterintuitive finding related to the wedding itself.
The wedding. How so?
Couples who spend relatively little money on the actual wedding ceremony and reception,
Okay.
but who have a lot of guests attend, like 50 or more, and who go on a honeymoon, those couples have a lower risk of divorce later on.
So a modest wedding, lots of friends and family, and a honeymoon is the recipe. Why would expensive weddings be linked to higher divorce risk?
The thinking is that starting a marriage with significant debt stress from a very costly wedding might put an immediate strain on the relationship right from the beginning.
Makes sense. Save money on the party, invest in the social network. What about living together before marriage? The research mentioned a cohabitation effect.
Yes, statistically, cohabitation before marriage is associated with a higher rate of divorce down the line.
Just living together increases the risk.
Well, the research gets more specific. The strongest predictor wasn't just cohabiting with the person you eventually marry. It was specifically linked to women who had cohabited with multiple partners other than their future husband. That situation showed the highest correlation with later divorce.
Okay, so prior cohabitation histories, specifically multiple partners for women, is the key factor there. We also need to touch on the health factor. There was a really stark finding related to serious illness, particularly concerning gender.
That was a staggering statistic, and quite frankly, a sad one. The research found that women are 6 times more likely to be separated or divorced shortly after being diagnosed with a serious illness, things like cancer or multiple sclerosis, compared to men who receive a similar diagnosis.
6 times more likely. That's a huge disparity. Did the research suggest why that happens? What's the mechanism?
It seems linked to traditional gender roles around caregiving. Typically, women often take on the primary caregiver role in a relationship. So when a man gets seriously ill, the wife frequently steps into that supportive role.
Right.
However, the data suggests that when the woman gets seriously ill, her male partner is significantly more likely to initiate a separation or divorce. It points towards a potential failure of reciprocal support when the woman is the one facing the major health crisis.
A really troubling finding. Let's move on to the effects of divorce, especially the ripple effects on children. The stats on academic and economic outcomes seem quite clear.
They are quite clear, and they show long-term consequences. Children whose parents divorce are about twice as likely to drop out of high school compared to kids from intact families.
Twice as likely.
Yes. And they also tend to achieve lower levels of socioeconomic status as adults, lower income, less wealth accumulation. Crucially, these effects aren't just immediate. They often persist and can even get worse years after the separation happened.
And beyond the measurable things like school and income, what about the psychological impact?
That's also significant. Divorce is strongly associated with poorer psychological well-being for children and even for adult offspring. We see high rates of unhappiness, anxiety, depression, and more use of mental health services. And the research suggests this is a causal link, not just a correlation.
What's the key driver of that psychological distress? Is it the divorce itself or something else?
What's really critical to understand is that the parental conflict seems to be the direct stressor, more so than the legal divorce event itself. High conflict, whether the parents stay together or separate, is damaging.
Which can be particularly hard on younger kids, right?
Absolutely. Preschoolers especially tend to be naturally egocentric. They see the world revolving around them. So they often internalize the conflict and blame themselves for the parent's separation, leading to feelings of guilt that can be quite profound and lasting.
And this experience, observing their parents' relationship and its breakdown, does that influence their own future relationships? Is there an intergenerational link?
There is. Statistically, children who experience their parents' divorce are more likely to get divorced themselves later in life.
Why is that?
It seems to be a combination of factors. There might be some genetic predispositions towards certain personality traits, but a major factor is likely the behavioral modeling. They learn patterns of communication and conflict resolution, or lack thereof, from watching their parents' marriage dynamics.
So they might repeat those patterns. Finally, there's a more recent trend we should mention: gray divorce.
Yes, gray divorce. That term refers to the noticeable increase in divorce among older couples, particularly the baby boomer generation in the U.S. Since the mid-1990s, the divorce rate for people over 50 has more than doubled.
Why the increase among older couples?
Sociologists point to a few key things. Women's increased financial independence plays a big role. They're less economically reliant on staying in a marriage. Longer life expectancies mean people might not want to spend 20 or 30 more years in an unhappy relationship. And there's just been a massive cultural shift. Less stigma attached to being divorced or single later in life.
Less pressure to just stick it out.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's try to wrap this up. We've covered a lot of ground. We've seen divorce evolve legally from needing proof of fault to mostly no-fault systems. We've seen how culture shapes everything from China trying to mandate stability with controversial rules to Mauritania where divorce is almost commonplace. And we've looked at the surprising factors: economics, health, even how much you spend on the wedding. And of course, the undeniable, measurable impacts on children that can last a lifetime.
If we zoom out one last time, thinking historically, How radical is the very idea of divorce compared to how marriage used to be viewed legally?
Well, that's where you see the most profound transformation, maybe. Think about medieval Europe under the strong influence of the Catholic Church. Marriage wasn't just a contract. It was seen as a sacrament, something indissoluble. You couldn't just end it.
Right. No divorce allowed back then.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
You could try for an annulment, arguing the marriage was invalid from the get-go, or you could get what was called a divorce from bed and board.
What was that? Divorcium immensa et thoro. It was basically just a legal separation. You lived apart, but you were still legally married. You couldn't remarry.
So you were stuck, in a way. When did that change?
It wasn't really until the Reformation and then the rise of secular governments that the view of marriage began to shift more towards being a contract.
Ah, the shift from sacrament to contract.
Exactly. And once it was seen as a contract, civil authorities felt they had the power to step in and dissolve that contract. They could grant what we now call a real divorce, a divorcium, a vinculo matrimoni, a divorce from all the bonds of marriage.
And that power, that process, is still central to how we handle divorce today.
It is. That whole historical journey really shows how profoundly our laws both reflect our social values and sometimes how they work to change them over time.
A fascinating look at how law and society interact. Thank you so much for diving into all these complex legal and social threads with us today.
It was my pleasure. A really important topic.